Welcome, everyone. We are so proud to present this event. This event is co-sponsored by Harriet Chapel and the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society, and we hope to do many other events together. We were very fortunate a while ago to meet Angela, and she was here, and she was telling us about Harriet Tubman, and she was so knowledgeable and so enthusiastic that we said, would you come back and do a presentation? And she very kindly has done that. And she will actually be doing another presentation for all of the 208th graders at Catoctin High School. And now it is my wonderful pleasure to introduce Angela Crenshaw, who is just a delightful person and just knows Harriet Tubman as though Harriet is part of her family. She brings a warmth and a relationship to her. And so I'm going to ask her to explain her background and what she does, because she can do it much better than I can. Angela.
Good morning, everyone. As Reverend Sally said, hello. As Reverend Sally said, my name is Ranger Angela Crenshaw. I'm currently the park manager of Rock, Susquehanna, and Palmer State Park. But for about 5 years, I worked at Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad State Park and Visitor Center in Church Creek, Maryland. And being down there allowed me to create a personal relationship with Harriet Tubman, and I enjoy doing these presentations and sharing Harriet Tubman with you all. Today is a very, very important day. It's Emancipation Day. It's the day that Harriet Tubman took her own liberty. So I'll be telling you a little bit about that today. But I want to focus on her incredible life and legacy, and I do want to point out I'm very happy to be here in real life. I've been doing a lot of these virtually, but doing these in person makes a very, very big difference. So I'll be talking to you about her life, and I'm going to focus on her time on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. She lived to be 91 years, so there's a lot to cover. I'm going to cover my favorite parts, and afterwards, if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. I do want to make a note. I have a presentation, but this will not be death by PowerPoint. I have this presentation because the landscape of Dorchester and Caroline County shaped young Harriet. So I want you to see what it looks like. I want you to almost feel the salty air. And since it's very, very different from Thurmont, I thought the pictures would be very, very nice. So, as I mentioned, she had 91 years, and we're going to start at the beginning. So Harriet Tubman was born in a town called Tobacco Stick, very close to the Blackwater River. It is now known as the town of Madison, in South Dorchester County on Maryland's Eastern Shore. Her parents, Ben and Rip Ross, gave her the name Araminta. So when she was born, her name was Araminta Ross, but she went by Minty for short. As you can see, South Dorchester County is a place of beautiful splendor and natural beauty. However, the horrors of slavery were a daily struggle for African Americans. Young Minty was born into the system of American bondage, which means she was a piece of property, very similar to furniture or cattle. She could be sold at any moment. She really had no rights. Young Harriet said, slavery is the next thing to hell. If a person would send another into bondage, she would send them to hell if he could. And I think these pictures illustrate that fact. This image right here is called the scourged back. I'll talk to you more about that later. This image you see right here is of enslaved people being sold and rented, along with inanimate objects such as rice and muslin, and books and horses. And then over here, you see a slave coffin. That's where enslaved people were chained together by their feet and their hands for transportation. That way they could move, but you weren't worried about anybody running away. So this image right here we have in our visitor center, and it's very hard to look at, so I like to explain it to people. This gentleman's name is Gordon. He ran away from slavery a few years before the Civil War. When he got to the Civil War, they did his medical examination. They checked him out to see if he was healthy, and they noticed these marks on his back. Those happened about 10 months before, which is why he ran away. This image was used in abolitionist material in New York, London, and Philadelphia. And it was also used by Henry William Garrison, who's a famous abolitionist. So I like to give that gentleman a name. A lot of people see that image, but they do not know his name. His name is Gordon. He was born in Louisiana. And he fought for our freedom as well as his, and he told people how horrible American slavery was. Tubman's first memory. The The first thing she remembers was lying in the cradle that her father made. When an enslaved child was born, they cut down a sweet gum tree. They hollowed it out. It was already naturally hollow. They added a headboard and a footboard. A local artist in Cambridge recreated one of those right there so you can see what it looks like. And you can see in that image, she is holding one of her younger brothers. Now, she has fond memories of this, but I couldn't imagine being her mother and worrying about your baby, taking care of your other baby as you work in the big house. Tubman said the baby began worrying or crying, so she cut a slab of pork in the fire, and she warmed it, and she put it in the baby's mouth, and the baby stopped crying. But when her mother came home, she thought that the piece of pork hanging out was the baby's tongue and that young airman that had killed the baby. But instead, she had succeeded in soothing her younger brother Moses or Henry. What I also love about that story is if you put bacon in my mouth, I'll stop talking. As a very young child, she had to check muskrat traps along the Little Blackwater River. This image you see here is the Little Blackwater River. It's called such because the water is actually clear, but all the tannins and materials in the water make it jet black. It's very beautiful down there. But, as you can see in this image, if you step in that water, you will sink up to your ankles, maybe up to your knees, and I can attest to that. It is very, very dangerous, very difficult work, especially for a young 6-year-old. She would have been checking muskrat traps for the Shacklefords and the Cook family. So muskrats are semi-aquatic critters, and they were brought here for their pelts. So you had to check them in the fall and the winter when their pelts were the thickest, so you could make jackets and things out of them. So this shows young Harriet Tubman checking muskrat traps in the dead of winter, not wearing a hat, not wearing a coat, not wearing any shoes. And I can tell you, muskrats are pretty foul-tempered creatures, and we pride ourselves on honesty here in the Maryland Park Service. But I'm going to tell you, that picture is not accurate. If you grab a muskrat by the tail, it will turn around, it will try to bite you. They have big teeth in the front. They are ferocious. They're very mean. So to send a 6-year-old out to do that, not the nicest thing. She actually contracted measles, so her mother pleaded with her owner to send her home, and she was able to nurse her back to health. When Harriet was an adolescent, she went to the Bucktown Village store with the plantation cook. This was supposed to be just a normal errand. But when Harriet got there, there was a runaway in the back of the store, and the slave master looked at Harriet and said, "Grab that slave." And Harriet said no. So he picked up a 3-pound weight. Oops. He picked up a 3-pound weight. Meaning to hit the runaway, he instead hit young Harriet right above her left eye. She passed out. She said you could take 3 fingers and stick them into her skull up to the first knuckle, and that's how deep her scar tissue was. She received no medical care. She was taken right next door. You can see the building there. She was put on the loom chair, and she bled, and she bled. She was actually put to work the next day, but she said she couldn't do any work because she was bleeding and crying so much in her eyes she couldn't see. So her mother took her back and tried to nurse her back to health. But since she wasn't working, she wasn't making any money. So her owner tried to sell her. She sent people around to check out young Harriet, and when you check out an enslaved person to see if they're good, it's like buying a new car. You check their arms for strength, you check their back, you check their legs. You sweep their mouth with your finger, which is pretty disgusting, but you want to check their teeth to see how healthy they are. And so when young Tubman couldn't be sold, her owner actually looked at her and said, "You're not worth a 6 pence to me." She said that to her as she was resting and trying to recuperate. So that happened at the Bucktown Village store, and that changed her life. So that was horrible for her physically. She never recovered from that. She never received stitches. Her eye was hooded for the rest of her life. But it was amazing for her faith. We think it gave Harriet Tubman temporal lobe epilepsy, which causes you to be devoid of fear. It also causes you to hear songs and have very vivid dreams. She would dream that she was flying over fields and that she was free. And then she would just start to burst into song and sing and clap. And at first people joined in with her, but then they thought she was a little bit off. But that was her faith speaking directly to her. So Thomas Garrett is one of my favorite Underground Railroad station masters. He was a white male Quaker. And of Tubman, he said, "I've never met any person of any color who had more faith in the voice of God as spoke direct to her soul, and her faith in the supreme power truly was great." So for a white male Quaker to talk about Tubman's faith in that way really speaks volumes about her faith. This image you're seeing is of Malone's Chapel. You can see there are Tubmans buried in the back, and I have a picture of the cornerstone there. Cornerstones are very important to churches. Harriet Chapel has a beautiful cornerstone, so I challenge you to look at both and see the difference. This cornerstone is very, very important. There are no natural stones on the eastern shore of Maryland, so somebody brought that to the interior of Dorchester County, with the purpose of it being the cornerstone of their church and the cornerstone of their religion. Alone's church is still standing, and it's the closest you can get to where Tubman was born. I like to use that to highlight her faith, because although she didn't worship there, that's where they had camp meetings and outdoor revivals, and that is where her faith became truly strong. After the Bucktown Village store incident, Tubman no longer wanted to work in the big house. She preferred the relative freedom of being outside, so she started working in the timber fields of South Dorchester County with her father, Ben Ross, who was a respected timber foreman. She worked under his very knowledgeable tutelage and also under his protection, because she would have been one of the few, if not the only, women working in the timber fields. She had a team of oxen, she hauled barrels, she cut down trees, and that is very hard and arduous work. Without chainsaws, without steel-toed boots, without long pants. You can see she's wearing a dress and she's walking through the timber fields and cutting down timber. Working in these timber fields required both free and enslaved labor. That's how much work it was. But it also required her to work around people who had skills and knowledge, including how to forage for food, how to read the stars, how to survive outside, and how to be comfortable in the woods. Those were all the skills she needed to become a successful conductor on the Underground Railroad, and she learned these all in these timber fields of South Dorchester County. The image you're seeing here is by Mark Priest. It is of both the free and enslaved Africans and African Americans living in South Dorchester County building Stewart's Canal. South Dorchester County is swampy and gritty. It is a rough place to work and to live. So instead of dragging the timber through the fields, they dug canals such as these that allowed them to fill the canals with water, and then you float the timber to neighboring cities such as Madison and Church Creek and Wolford. This is important because Stewart's Canal is still in existence today. If you drive through South Dorchester County, it's still there. You can see it. It's actually a straight line, and nature doesn't do straight. You can actually kayak portions of it. This is where Tubman actually met blackjacks, free African American sailors. And they're the ones who taught her how to read the stars and how to navigate by night. That is a skill that they needed for their livelihood that she picked up from them, and then she ended up using later. Before the Civil War, it was illegal to educate African Americans, free or enslaved. So Harriet Tubman never received a formal education. Her education was received in the timber fields and the swamps of South Dorchester County. She said, "I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty and having no experience of it, and I was not happy or contented." Later in her life, she met her niece, and her niece could read, and she got so much joy listening to her niece read because she never had that opportunity. When people ask me, was Harriet Tubman ignorant? I said, technically, because she couldn't read words and letters, but she was full of knowledge, and she received her education in the School of Hard Knocks, basically, in the timber fields of Dorchester County. In 1849, young Minty tried to escape with her brothers, Ben and Harry. Her brothers became afraid, and they fought over which way to go. I guess they didn't know she was Harriet Tubman. And they ended up turning back. This is the runaway notice for that. It was actually found in a dumpster in Cambridge, Maryland. One of our project partners got it and scanned it and took care of it. So as you can see here, ran away from the subscriber, Harry, Ben, and Minty. They're to be returned to Eliza Ann Brodus in Bucktown, Dorchester County. And I like these runaway notices because they were meant to be horrific things. They were supposed to go out and find anyone who vaguely resembled these individuals. But now it is a record, and now we know that Minty was age 27. It is chestnut color and fine looking and about 5 feet tall, just like your favorite ranger. But Harriet Tubman's owner continued to live well beyond his means. He liked to go out, he liked to buy nice things, he liked to soup up his carriage and have new horses. So she sensed the storm was coming. Early in her life, she had lost Mariah Riddy, Lina, and Soph, her 3 sisters, to the chain gang, never to be seen again. She would go to sleep and hear her one sister screaming out for her child. She did not want that fate for herself. So sensing that she would be sold, in the fall of 1849, Tubman took her liberty, and she emancipated herself from the bonds of slavery from Caroline County from a place called Poplar Neck. Using her connections on the Underground Railroad and reading the stars and foraging for food, she made it to freedom in Philadelphia, and that is what we are celebrating today. Oh, freedom, she said, when I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything, and the sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. Whenever anyone asks me what freedom means, I say that quote to them because I think it encapsulates exactly what freedom is. But what was freedom without those he loved? Using the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman emancipated over 70 family and friends and people that she could not live without. She said that I was free and they should be free. I would make a home for them in the North and bring them there, God willing. A lot of people think Harriet Tubman created the Underground Railroad, but it was busy and it was active way before Harriet Tubman was born. I love this image. It's by Jacob Lawrence, and it shows Harriet Tubman right here, pointing at the North Star and directing her charges through the woods to get to their freedom. I love the vivid colors and the imagery. We have that in the visitor center, and we have it in the stained glass image, and it's very, very moving. I like to tell people about the Underground Railroad because we get people come into the park, and they look at me, and they look around, and they do this, and they look under things. I let them do that for a little while, and I say, hey, what are you looking for? And they're like, we're looking for the railroad tracks. We're looking for a station, we're looking for a conductor. So I like to tell people, in spite of its name, the Underground Railroad had no tracks, no trains, and no cabooses. It was a resistance movement against American slavery through flight and emancipation. Both black and white people helped to emancipate and helped to move African Americans from the South to freedom in the North. And it included everybody, and they used terms in railroad vernacular to hide what they were doing, because sometimes they sent letters and you don't want to admit that you're breaking the law in the letter. So using this railroad vernacular, Harriet Tubman would have been a conductor, someone that leads the journeys. They also had agents, people who planned the journey and coordinated the journey. They had stations, and those were safe houses where you could take a bath, you could get new shoes, you could actually get good sleep. And those stations were run by station masters. Her most famous quote is, I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. That is the Harriet Tubman quote. And she said that at a suffragette conference. But my favorite part of Tubman is how she was a natural outdoors woman. She, to me, was the ultimate outdoors woman. She said that she could read natural signs and travel at night as well as any hunter. She preferred to travel during the winter when the nights were the longest and the days were the shortest, as well as the sky was very, very clear. Especially in South Dorchester County where it's a swamp. Sometimes in August, you know the stars are up there, but you can't see them. But in January and in December, it is clear and you can see the skies right above you. Excuse me, the stars right above you. So that's how she would travel. I love this piece of artwork. It was inspired by Harriet Tubman in our park by a gentleman named Eric Saylor. You can kind of see in the corner, the fence is open, and so he's inviting you to walk out and take your freedom as well. I think it's a beautiful piece of art. And then this is the newest picture of Harriet Tubman. She's about in her 20s there. Harriet also used the sound of an owl to let her charges know that it was safe to come out. It would have been the hoot owl. Some people think it sounds like it's saying, who cooks for you, who cooks for you, who cooks for you all. And Robert Hayden actually wrote a poem about Harriet Tubman called Run to Get, and I've committed it to memory. And he says, hoot owl call into the haunts in the air, 5 times call into the haunts in the air. Shadow of a face in the scary leaves, shadow of a voice in the talking trees. Just letting you know to read the signs, to pay attention. And he called Harriet Tubman a woman of the earth, and I could not agree more. During the Civil War, Harriet Tubman was a nurse and a cook by day, and a spy and a scout by night. On June 1st, 1863, she became the first and only woman to lead and execute an armed raid during the Civil War. They called her General Moses. They took 3 steam-powered gunships, the Harriet Weed, the Sentinel, and the John Adams, and they chugged 25 miles up the Combahee River in South Carolina. Now that might sound strange to you, but the landscape of South Carolina looks very similar to that of Dorchester County. It is swampy, swampy lowlands. While they were en route, one of the boats got stuck, so they had to transport everybody over. But the whole point of this was guerrilla warfare. They blew up locations, they flooded rice fields, and they broke up what is now Route 1 with the Combahee River Bridge, which was a main supply transport. So this was a boon, not only for He enslaved people that were emancipated because they freed 700 to 730 enslaved people on that journey. It was also a boon for Colonel James Montgomery, when he had 100 to 110 men from that raid sign up for his army. So the people that were just emancipated stayed down there and fought for freedom. Harriet Tubman said that initially people were hesitant and they didn't want to get on the boats, but when they heard the whistle chime twice, they knew that Lincoln's gunboats had come to set them free, and they grabbed anything they could and ran towards the boats. And this is a drawing of one of those boats with the American flag, and I can't imagine what that was like, because apparently Harriet Tubman sat on the second floor deck and just watched everybody, and she coordinated everything. She tells a story. She said it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. It was a woman. She had a pot of rice on her head still steaming, a kid under one arm, and she was dragging a pig behind her. She was running to the boats. She had grabbed anything she could just to get to her freedom. But my favorite aspect of this is not the point that she was the first African-American and only African-American woman to lead a raid. It was because it showed her compassion. She stayed behind after the Civil War and taught people how to cook and how to clean. She understood that you needed assistance when you transitioned from being a piece of property to having your own rights, and she stayed down there with those people to assist. And she said, those from the mainland are destitute, nearly naked, and I'm trying to find places for those able to work and provide for them as best as I can, while at the same time they learn to respect themselves by earning their own living. I really love that because she understood what that struggle was like when she got to Philadelphia in 1840. And a lot of guests at the park asked me, did Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman know one another? And they did indeed know one another. They were born 2 counties apart, both on the eastern shore of Maryland. Of Miss Tubman, Douglass said, the midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and your heroism. Meaning that everything that he did was done in the light. He spoke aloud, he went to conferences, and he talked about the horrors of American slavery. But everything she did was at night and undercover because she was still wanted. She was still a fugitive herself. Later in her life, Harriet Tubman purchased a home in Auburn, New York, and she adopted a little girl named Bertie with her second husband, Nelson Davis. She was known around town for creating a remedy for colicky babies from items from her beautiful garden and from going into the woods and collecting things. She was also very active in the AME Zion Church up in Auburn, New York. In 1865, she purchased a 5-acre lot up in New York with the hopes for opening a home for aged and infirmed African Americans. She struggled to raise money for her goal. She even continued boarding children and collecting clothing for the destitute and feeding the homeless in her own personal house. And then, in 1908, she was finally able to open the Harriet Tubman Home for Aged and Infirm Negroes. She had finally achieved her dream, her lifelong dream. She realized, especially after she emancipated her parents who were in their 70s at the time, what do you do with older African Americans after they've been enslaved all their lives? So she saw that need and she fulfilled it. Later in her life, she was confined to a wheelchair, and eventually she was put into the home that she fought so hard to open. And this is where that image of Harriet Tubman, the last that we have of her, was taken. Oh, the shawl that she's wearing was given to her by the Queen of England.
Wow.
Yes, it's a big deal. It's located in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, as well as her favorite animal. Thank you, that's my mother. I always bring one fan, and she did it. And though Harriet Tubman couldn't read, she would still take her hymnal and sing from it, and it meant a lot to her, as well as this scarf. Is the what? Yeah, the house is still up in New York. It's Harriet Tubman National Historical Park up in New York. On March 10, 1913, Tubman passed away. But before she did, she said, I go away to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you also may be. I love that because even in death, she's thoughtful and kind. Here's an image of her gravestone. She's buried up in Auburn, New York at Fort Hill Cemetery. Her brother is right in front of her, and she's below a very beautiful old shade tree. I went up to Auburn to say thank you to Harriet for everything she had done for me, and I brought all of the patches from our park, and you'll be getting a few of those a little bit later. If you'd like to take your journey further, I encourage you to read Bound for the Promised Land by Dr. Kate Clifford Larson. The book is amazing. It is long, it is very thick, it's very educational, but all of the exhibits in the park are based on that. And Kate is still studying Harriet Tubman. Whenever she finds something new, she scans it and sends it to me, and we have a frantic phone call about Harriet Tubman. It's really wonderful. And since we are honoring Harriet Tubman today on Emancipation Day, I brought something for everybody. And my mom and the good Reverend will help hand these out. I also brought pencils and pens for you all to complete them as well. But once everyone gets one, I'll describe to you what they are. Yes, the most important thing, please write your name on it. There are 40 or so of you in here, and we got to make sure that you keep your booklet. So have a look, and then I'll explain them to you shortly.
Did you get one, Lisa? Really well done.
So this is our Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Junior Ranger. Of course. Yep.
Get yours.
So when I was working down in the park, I noticed teachers would bring their students to the park and they would have a one-sided piece of paper with some scribbles on there about Harriet Tubman that weren't necessarily true. And that you couldn't answer from the visitor center.
Sure.
Also, before we opened, we decided.
Okay.
Oh, she is. Before we opened, we decided that all the fourth graders in Dorchester County and neighboring Talbot County would come to our park and learn about Harriet Tubman. That's like 600, 1,000 kids. And I was so honored, but I decided that they can't learn about Harriet Tubman in black and white. So they needed a full-color booklet about Miss Tubman. So please, the most important thing, write your name down here at the bottom. You don't want to get your booklet mixed up with someone else's. I'm hearing some rumblings. Everyone can become a junior ranger. In the Maryland Park Service, we do not discriminate anyone. And I want all of you to become junior rangers. When I created this booklet as I was leaving the park, I did a tally. We had 12,000 junior rangers. As of 2 months ago, there are up to 20,000 junior rangers.
I'm gonna have to get a different pen.
Our pencil are now added to that number. I'm going to describe this booklet to you real quick. As I said, the first most important step, please write your name. There's 40 of you and these books will start to look the same. Hey, Mom, on the first page, we have a description of our beautiful park, and we have how to become a junior ranger. If you're 5 to 6, you do 3 activities. If you're 7 to 10, you do 6 activities. And if you're 11 or older, I see a lot of 11 or older in here, complete at least 10 activities, please and thanks. On page 3, there's a glossary. When I was growing up, I loved to do activity books, and I loved the glossary. So there are some terms in the visitor center and in this book that are very important that most folks don't know, such as a cockle, a group of enslaved people chained together by slave traders in order to travel. Emancipation, legally setting free those persons who are enslaved. So, please use this glossary. There's a word that's missing. I know it. Please don't tell me about it. On page 4, there's a half a page about Harriet Tubman and a half a page about the Underground Railroad as well. Once again, I want you all to have the correct information about my personal hero, Miss Harriet Tubman, and who I call the original Team Tubman, which is the Underground Railroad. On page 5, who are you? You can't know Harriet Tubman if you don't know who you are, so please draw a picture of yourself and write your name. This is the only activity that I actually check. I will be checking to see that you drew a picture of yourself. I'd like it to be accurate, please and thanks. Then on page 6, we talk about the meaning of freedom. That is very, very important, and you'll see the image of the slave couple walking through Washington, D.C. that I used earlier. Page 7, this runaway notice of Harriet Tubman is very, very important. It is a piece of history, so I got approval to scan it and put it in our booklet, so now you all get a picture of this runaway ad that was found in the dumpster. I want you to read it, and I want you to answer the questions. And then page 8, who is Harriet Tubman? Answer those questions. On 9, we have a crossword puzzle. When I worked at the park, people complained that it was really hard. And I said, did you notice the word bank at the bottom? And then I walked away. So there is a word bank at the bottom. And then there's a lady here, right here in a white shirt. She's going to be very happy to learn about the Combahee River Raid. Has its own page on page 10. Please complete that. Then on page 11 we have a Tubman code search. On page 12 we have the hardest activity. It is a word search. You say you love those. This was generated by a computer. It is very difficult. So I say, do this with the team. Make it like the Underground Railroad. Work with your agents and your conductors and your station masters to get this done. And since I like you all, I'll give you a tip. Most of the answers are in this top corner right here. That is a key tip. And the words can be backwards too. So keep that in mind. Very confusing and hard. Then Harriet Tubman by the numbers. There are some important years and numbers in Harriet Tubman's life. I think you all will be able to know that she's 5 feet tall, just like me, even in my Ranger boots. That she was born in 1822, giving you some hints here. And then my favorite activity is actually down here at the bottom on page 13. I actually put it in there because I needed to fill the space, but it's been the most meaningful activity for people. A lot of folks don't know that she was given the name Araminta when she was born, so I ask you what your name means, why you have it, and who gave it to you. So we think that she took the name Harriet Tubman in honor of her mother or a favorite aunt. A lot of African Americans reuse names, and so the Ross family did as well. So I ask you what your name means and why you have it. Feel free to call a friend, call your mom, ask why you have your name. I know I have my name. My mother's name was Von Seal from heaven. Hi, Von Seal. And I'm Angela because I fell from heaven. How's cute? Isn't that sweet?
That is sweet.
And then we have a journal entry. You imagine that you or your friends, your family, or when I talk to school students, they're usually in smaller groups. I said, imagine your group is on the Underground Railroad as you go through the park and the visitor center. Do you make it? Do you get chased? Do you get caught? Do you run out of food? Does someone get hurt? And when I do this with kids, I try to help them realize that this is harder than they think. Everybody's like, yeah, I can make it to freedom. And I'm like, young man, it took you 15 minutes to walk to the bathroom. That's not realistic here. So keep that in mind. When you run away with the clothes you're wearing. When I'm doing my personal research, I find it's important to change your clothes because if I walked through the woods looking like this, I'd be covered in mud. I'd be wet. I'd have stains on my clothes, and when I arrived in town, say I walked into Frederick, I'd look like exactly what I was, a runaway. So it's very important to get to these stations and have a change of clean clothes so you don't look like you've been traipsing through the mud and sleeping in the woods at night. And then on the back, I describe our lovely visitor center, and I have a picture of a junior ranger with one of our employees. And then the last and final item, since we are all here, and since I'm going to assume that you guys are going to finish these booklets, I'm watching you, we're going to take the Junior Ranger pledge. So please raise your right hand and repeat after me. As a Junior Ranger, I promise to discover all I can about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad.
I promise to discover all I can about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad.
Share my discoveries with others. I will learn about the legacy of freedom seekers. And those who fought hard for freedom throughout the United States. I pledge to do my part to protect the natural. The cultural. Historical. And recreational resources. Of my public lands. For the enjoyment. Education. And inspiration. Of this and future generations. Thank you. You guys are all Junior Rangers. Sally, everybody gets a pass.
Oh, this is awesome.
So this patch was designed by me and my team. When you enter the park, you get welcomed by this bust of Harriet Tubman right there. It was made by a local artist. It is actually bronze. It is actually 5 feet tall. So to me, this is our true mascot. So everybody gets a patch. And keep in mind, you took a pledge to protect our natural resources. Yes, to protect our natural resources and learn more about freedom seekers. And I encourage you to read Kate's book, Bound for the Promised
called
Land.
Bound for the
It is
Promised
a lovely book. This is the copy I keep at work. My copy at home looks like it fell off of a bus. I can't sell anything. No, because you work on Amazon. Yeah. And then everybody wants to know where they can read direct accounts from runaways. This is called The Underground Railroad. It's published by William Still. Yes, wow, it is thick. It is heavy. It was the largest book published by an African American man for 6 years straight. He self-published this, and these are the accounts of people that came through his office in Philadelphia. So it is the opposite of the runaway notice that I showed you. He would sit you down, he would ask you your name, ask you where you came from, ask you why you ran away and who you're looking to meet, and talk to you about what you thought of American slavery. So these direct accounts are in this book. And he would also describe you. She's wearing a It's Cool to Be Kind shirt and has some very stylish earrings and some red shoes when she came into my office. And that way it's your account. This is a direct account. It is massive and huge. And just a warning, it's not, there's no plot. These are just accounts. But he does stick them together. Harriet Tubman has her own section in here. And it is very small print. And when he could, he actually found the runaway notice and he contrasted it with what he had taken down and written about people. So I'll have these up front if you want to flip through. This is available on Amazon. They have a hard copy that's $50, but if you want to get the $20 version, that's what it looks like.
And I did want to say on that one, after they were emancipated or freed after the Civil War, that became a record of how you could find who you were separated from when you were looking for your family.
And that's why he was so descriptive.
And what was the other book, the name of the
Bound for the Promised Land. Yeah. Like Dr. Kate Clifford Larson. I do recommend both. So I'd like to thank Reverend Sally for inviting me here, as well as Teresa Donnelly, and Liz Chateau couldn't be here, but I'd like to thank her as well. I truly enjoy talking Tubman and take pride in sharing her story and her life and legacy with you all. I'm inspired by her knowledge of nature and her caring, and I aspire to be as caring and loving as she is. So thank you guys for your attention. And if you have any questions, I can do my best to answer them.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
3 of them actually. One is her relationship to John Brown. The second was, besides the South Carolina military expedition, I wanted to know more about, I've read some books about what she did, both in caring for the wounded, but also other military expeditions. I mean, she really was
General Tubman.
a general in the military sense of being a general. So those 2. And the last was when you talked about her knowing about the Underground Railroad before. Do you know more about that, or who she knew, or how that happened?
All the people in the timber field.
That's it?
Yeah, all
So
the
the
blackjacks.
sailors
Yeah.
and the timber
Her
field.
father, Ben Ross, was an agent on the Underground
Got it,
Railroad, which is
got
why
it.
she came back and took him.
Got
I'll
it.
answer your questions backwards. So
Okay.
she knew about the Underground Railroad because it was everywhere.
Got
It
it.
was her community. It was the people around her. Reverend Samuel Green was her pastor.
Oh.
He was also an agent on the Underground Railroad. She came back for her father and mother in the spring, which was rare for her, but she heard they were going to be sold. So she came back to them as quickly as possible. But it surrounded her everywhere. It was everyone in her community. During her time in South Dorchester County, half the African Americans were free and half were enslaved. So if you could imagine going to work with people who couldn't go home to their children, who couldn't decide what they were going to eat and what they were going to wear and how they were going to live, that is a big difference. So everybody surrounding her was aware of the Underground Railroad. Her relationship with John Brown, she was supposed to be on the failed Harper's Ferry raid with her, with him, but there were portions of her life where she was missing, and we think that was because she was struggling with her temporal lobe epilepsy. She would have horrible headaches as well. She said she would go to sleep and wake up and still need to sleep some more, have fitful, sick person sleep, which I'm sure you all can understand. So she missed that raid, which was good. She also had a bad dream about that raid. Before she was supposed to go to Harper's Ferry with John Brown, she had a dream that there was a giant snake and he rose up. And then there were 2 smaller snakes, and the 2 smaller snakes got hit by stones and passed out. So what she saw was John Brown, who lived, but his two sons who passed away. So she didn't go on that raid for multiple reasons. I'm sure that bad dream told her not to go. It was a little premonition, but she also might not have been physically or mentally well enough. And your other question
It was about,
military.
under General
Military,
Grant
yes.
and others, other
Yes.
military.
She did multiple military actions, but the Cumberland River raid was the biggest and the most successful. She actually fed Colonel Shaw his final meal. She did care for wounded soldiers, and she talks about, I guess, what would be considered PTSD now, and hearing everything raining down and seeing blood everywhere as Colonel pulls water. So she was on multiple military raids, but I love the Cumberland River raid because that's a big. And I can talk to you more after.
Okay.
I'll tell you what else. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that at some point when she was trying to free people that she had to carry a gun?
Yes.
Because once people got so far into the journey, they would become frightened and discouraged and want to go back, and she refused to let any of them go back, so she carried a gun to threaten them.
Yes, she indeed carried a pistol. A lot of people thought it was more like a long rifle. She only carried a long rifle during the war. If you can imagine traipsing through the woods, you do not want a giant long rifle with you, especially when you're creeping around. So she carried something small that she could take from her back or that she could hide in her belt. And she did use it to encourage people, because if one person walked back, it would give everybody away. And she said she didn't take on anyone. She said, I can't bring more people with me than I can care for. So everyone that she brought with her, she guaranteed to get to the end. And if there was a group of 10 and 5 people started walking away, it would be very obvious what was going on right there. So she did carry a small pistol. She never had to use it.
Is it also true that from all that she did in these different homes and things that she opened up for people, that she actually died in poverty?
She didn't die well off, but her whole point was sharing her life and being compassionate and being open. The final image of her was at that wasn't the home that she opened for aged and indigent African Americans. So she struggled with money all of her life, mainly because she was so giving and so good.
Did she not have to sue for her pension or after the Civil War? Okay, her pension
That's a very good question. She did indeed sue for her pension. She requested $25, and that was to cover Nelson Davis, her husband, who was also a veteran. That's how they met, and her. The government actually only gave her $20, so I think it's a little ironic they want to put her on the $20 bill, but it's still an honor. But she should have gotten more money than what she asked for, indeed, because of her service and that of her husband, with the hopes to support their adopted daughter, Gertie. Yes, ma'am.
Is there anything that tells how the troops responded to having not only an African American but a woman, and a woman who might not have seemed typical?
Yeah.
How did they respond to that as a person in charge?
They loved it. She would sing, she would cook for them, and I don't know about you, but whenever we have Ranger School, we have a bunch of big events. If I cook for someone, they're automatically my friends. If I feed you, I clearly care for you. You know, it's clearly another act of love. But since she would sing songs and lead people in song, it was amazing. She was an amazing leader. So I can imagine 3 steam-powered gunships full of 200 men singing and clapping along with Harriet Tubman. If I could dust off the flux capacitor and go back in the day, I'd go back to June 1st and 2nd, 1863, so I could sing with Harriet Tubman in South Carolina. But they did. They responded very well to her. There are articles written about Harriet Tubman. They called it a glorious consummation, which is a big deal in military terms. And for them to be talking about a 5-foot-tall African-American woman, it's a big deal. But they responded very well. Yes.
Did she do her conducting mainly from the Eastern Shore to Philadelphia?
Yes.
And do we have an idea what that route actually was?
Yes, we do have an idea of that route. People always ask me that. It was about 100 miles from South Dorchester County to Philadelphia, but keep in mind, after 1850, when the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, you had to go further than that. So you actually had to go to Canada, as they call it, Ontario West. So they actually had to make their way up to Canada. And she only traveled from the eastern shore of Maryland because that's where her network was, that's where her community was, and that's where she was familiar with. I've traipsed around in the woods in South Worcester. It's hard to navigate and difficult, but if that was all I knew, and that was what I was comfortable with, I would only stay there. And since she only came back for family and friends, yes, it was only in Maryland. Also, it's expensive and time-consuming and very difficult. I lead hikes for a living, and I have to tell people, we just hiked for 2 hours. We could be doing this for days and weeks with Tubman. Sometimes it would take 4 days, sometimes it would take 2 weeks. It just depended on who was helping her. It depended on the weather. It depended if there were slave catchers out there. There are a lot of variables involved in that, which is why she only did it in Maryland, because she knew the area and she had community. So Maryland up to Philadelphia, she'd go through Wilmington, Delaware, and then eventually all the way up to northern Pennsylvania, as well as upstate New York as well. Yes, sir. Oh. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is it true that the word underground came from these Quakers, these people that were helping them to escape? They would have like somewhere underground in their homes where they would put these people to safety.
So
and
it's
would sort of be covered up with
called
big carpet.
because it was underground?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. On the eastern shore of Maryland, the water table is so high, there are no basements. There really is no underground. If you go dig a 5-foot hole, water comes up, even to this day. So the term Underground Railroad, it's hard to tell where that came from. I've heard 3 different stories, but my favorite one is when a gentleman named Tice Davis was escaping from slavery. And he jumped in the Ohio River, and the slave catcher was following him. Tice swam across the Ohio River and climbed up the embankment, and the slave catcher was following him, and he said he disappeared like he was on an underground road. So that's where the underground comes from, and during that time the railroad was the newest and the biggest and the fastest way to transport people and cargo, so they put the 2 together. But again, it's very hard to tell where that came from. I've heard 3 different stories, but I like the Tice Davis story. I could swim the Ohio River. You gotta mean it. You gotta want it. Yeah. Any other questions I can answer? Well, thank y'all for listening. I have some books up here if you want to see the books.
And if I could please introduce the director of the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. Liz, do you want to come up?
Sure.
This is
Thank you.
Elizabeth Comer, and she's going to tell you about
The rest of the day.
Pardon?
The rest of the day?
Well, and what's going on around here in Turk that was affected by this.
Thank
But
you.
first, you know what I should do? Let's give her a big
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Angela, that was amazing. That was really amazing. Such a fabulous story and related beautifully. Well, welcome, as you've been welcomed already, but I'll just welcome you once again to the historic Catoctin Furnace. We are the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society, and this is obviously in partnership with Harriet Chapel. We're all part of this beautiful village that has a dark and difficult history, and that dark and difficult history is what we endeavor to bring to light. Angela and I were just this week, she graciously did a sensitivity reading for an article that's going to be in the Nordic Journal of Human Rights, kind of an interesting way to get Catoctin Furnace more international exposure, but we really appreciate everything you do for us because it's an amazing story and we want to be able to tell it well and tell it in a sensitive and meaningful manner. Catoctin Furnace, the Historical Society started 50 years ago. It was the brainchild vision of a group of residents and friends, all connected with Harriet Chapel, who wanted to save the village from the threat of a roadway. So the Historical Society still, 50 years later, is telling the story of the village. It's an iron-making village from prior to the Revolution, built and, the labor because of the enslaved Africans who were brought here by the Johnsons, by the Brinns, by the Kumpels. The owners relied on the slave labor, and that allowed them to make an enormous amount of money. That power and prestige of the families is still extant today. The village is surrounded by 4 mansions, and those alone are just one testament to the wealth that was created on the backs and labor and skills of the enslaved Africans So it's a dark and difficult history, and we at the Historical Society try to keep that in mind for everything we do in relaying the story to our visitors and to people who come here. So what we'd like to do today to sort of round out the story of Harriet Tubman is tell you a little bit about our freedom seekers. We had at least 16. There were undoubtedly more. One gentleman, Matt, got as far as New York, changed his name, and darned if he didn't get somebody recognized him, wrote to his former owner. There was a huge lawsuit. We lose track of him. He did lose the lawsuit, even though there was a great deal of support in New York for him. We can't find him back in Maryland. We're hoping, and we suspect very strongly, that he didn't, even though he was supposed to come back to Maryland. We think he got away and perhaps went to Canada. We are very close to the Pennsylvania line, but as Angela said, after the act that meant that Pennsylvania was no longer in the Fugitive Slave Act, Pennsylvania was not the place where you would go to have your ultimate freedom. You had to go all the way to Ontario. But we're so close to Pennsylvania that that's one of the reasons. We have one enslaved gentleman who comes up from Georgia with his owner, the governor, Mr. Telfair, and Gabriel. And Gabriel, you can just imagine, he's 7 miles from freedom, and he's like, I'm not going back to Georgia. And so he and another enslaved gentleman from Catoctin made their way north. And we're hoping, again, that they were successful. We do, however, know that some of our freedom seekers were not successful because they show back up in wills and in probate records some years later. And so that's an unfortunate part of the story. So this afternoon, after your snack, courtesy of Harriet Chapel, or you go for lunch somewhere, we have tours of the Museum of the Ironworker. We'd like to offer those. We also can take you on a tour. Either you can do it self-guided, or we can take you on a tour of the African American Cemetery Interpretive Trail, which takes you from the furnace to an overlook as close as you can get to the African American Cemetery. That cemetery was found when this road was being built, was found during archaeological investigation prior to the construction of the road. And 35 graves were uncovered, which 33 individuals were still in the graves. Those remains were removed. They were in the active roadway. Now, in 2022, they would build a road there, but in 1979, the idea was you build a road, remove the graves. And the remains of those individuals have been subject of our quest for a descendant community for the past 8.5 years, because we don't have that at the top. We don't have a community that can come back and say, my ancestors created this well, built this, helped build this church, helped build the structures of the Catoctin furnace, which they undoubtedly did. But we don't have that community. They've been separated from that legacy. It's really a lost legacy. And through our partnership with the Smithsonian and Harvard University, we are attempting to find that descendant community utilizing DNA. So there are a couple of things that we'll be able to show you at the museum and talk to you more about that, tell you more about those programs that we're doing, the research we're doing. We're very much a research-based organization. So we have a couple of things we want to point out that are on the table back there. We have some kitchen gardens that you can visit, so we have a brochure about that. There is a self-guided tour of the African American Cemetery Interpretive Trail. Of course, the Museum of the Ironworker, which features 2 forensic facial reconstructions, one of a 15-year-old boy and one of a 30-some-year-old mother who were buried in the cemetery. Our Catoctin furnace brochure, the orange brochure as we call it, has just been reprinted. It tells you the general story of Catoctin. And we also have the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom and the Harriet Tubman brochures from the National Park Service. And a few of these wonderful junior ranger activity books and from the Underground Railroad and ours as well. So please take any and all brochures, and